topic this morning is desperate faith, but the parable of the mustard tree. And all of us have probably heard this many different times, many different ways, but hopefully this morning we can get a little bit more in depth with it and understand it a little bit better. My lovely daughter, Sydney, is going to be passing out a handout to help us this morning that we can keep our thoughts together and moving forward with it. But as I study teachers, and as I study the concept of what Christ was as a teacher, there's a lot of things that he does that is unique, but probably on the extreme of how we would understand how to communicate with people. And there's a rabbinical teaching method that normally begins with asking the question, what shall I compare it with? Or what shall I liken it with? Of trying to bring into concept, into focus, a topic to say, okay, this is what I'm trying to get across. How can I do something or say something to bring it into the natural world? And that methodology is all throughout his teaching. The hard part of that is to be able to do that, you really have to know your material. It has to be at a level that is second nature. When you see something, you're able to pull things and do this. But there's also a few things that we can look at to understand why he was a master storyteller. And one of the first things in your notes is what allowed for him to do this. And he is teaching from a position of the highest possible motives. As a teacher, often our motives get scrambled of where I know I need to be in the classroom Monday morning at 7 a.m., but I'd rather be golfing. You know what? Sometimes we're human. But he's teaching from the highest possible motives, a motive of love, a motive of sympathy, just as its core. God, we know, is love. Christ, from his core motive of love and of sympathy. He also has a motive of compassion. Often it would say he would look at them and have compassion. I would love to be able to say all the times I've looked at some person that I've looked and had compassion. But there's times where I catch myself thinking thoughts that I probably shouldn't think about somebody else. And fourthly, he ultimately had a divine mission. You want to talk about a purpose, a mission. But this allows for him to be a master teacher because he's always in tune, one, out of love, second, out of sympathy, compassion, and mission. I'm just putting some things down to help us understand some teaching aspects this morning before we really get to the parable. But of this, he has 5 qualifications then. The first one is he had a proper worldview. I've had some amazing teachers that didn't have the right worldview. One of the greatest speakers I've heard in my life was President Bill Clinton. Phenomenal speaker. Phenomenal speaker. He could pull the heartstrings, say the right phrases, and pull people in. Proper worldview? Debatable. The second one is knowledge of the subject material, the subject matter. Christ, all throughout his speaking, is layering it with references from the Old Testament, the Hebrew text, pulling into the current context, the geographical world, the natural world. He is layering his teaching because his knowledge of the subject matter is intense. And we often miss that. Often you would ask somebody what type of level or what type of elite status was Christ as a teacher, and most people will say he was almost a peasant-style teacher, simple teacher. But you dive into his teachings, and it's amazing. The depth of it is incredible. The third one is he had knowledge of his hearer or the student that's listening. He often would ask the right question specifically for that person. And fourth, we understand his ability in teaching. And fifth, the character was worth imitating. There's nothing like listening to a teacher that doesn't match the message. I always joke, I shouldn't say this. I always love the sermons on fasting from someone that's not showing that they've ever done it before. I know I shouldn't have said that. That's always one I just start chuckling with. So why did this greatest teacher, why did Christ use stories as the foundation of establishing truth? Because we say stories are for kids. Stories are something that just to learn a few things, that's where it begins. But our brains love stories. Anytime you hear once upon a time or in the beginning or, hey, I got to tell you something that happened to me yesterday, immediately you're at attention. Why? Because we love stories. Now, scientifically, they found out that when somebody is telling a story, the same areas of the brain fire of those of the listener. When I tell you a story, my brain is firing the exact same way that your brain is firing and listening to it. They call it mirroring or neural coupling. The exact same part of our brains are interacting. It is the only method that this happens. You could listen to a lecture on scientific data, a historical lecture, but only when it starts to begin breaking into a story do those mechanisms begin to fire together, and that connection is made. That's why when we're watching a dancing light bulb on a screen, we start clapping and enjoying it. Why? It's a story. It breaks through those barriers with us, and Christ was a master storyteller. What's interesting is the author of Made to Stick, it's the Heath brothers, but Chip Heath is a Stanford professor, was studying why people understand stories so well and not other methods. And what he found is if it's a data or a statistic, only 5% of you or us will remember the statistic. Only 5%. 63% of those that heard a story would recall it. Look around. Only 5% of us are going to remember the statistic. Yeah. But story is overwhelming. Mark Twain once observed that a lie can get halfway around the world before truth can get its boots on. Have you often wondered why conspiracy theories and these incredibly inaccurate stories just race and everybody accepts it? And then the truth comes out and it's far harder to break through that narrative, to get the truth back out. That's why facts, education, and all that is much harder to break through than some of that that's been taught through a story. I came across a story about Texas that I really that connects this point, because Texas used to have a problem because of its amazing big sky country and long deserted open roads. They had a littering problem. Truckers would stop and empty out their truck and just leave it there. Locals would come by and just dump stuff all over the road. And Texas was known to have one of the dirtiest highways in the U.S. So they tried to say, okay, how can we create a campaign for an anti-littering campaign? Just to try to stop this littering. Instead of having tumbleweeds blow by, we're having McDonald's bags. So they came up with a slogan. Does anybody know what it is? Don't mess with Texas. 3 months, 73% of Texans could quote you that slogan. 36% decrease in littering within the first year. Over 70% decrease in littering within 3 years. Why? Don't mess with Texas is a story. Don't mess. Don't make a mess. Brilliant. Texas, we stick together. Remember the Alamo? We're in this. Now, I looked for Indiana's anti-littering slogan. We don't have one. Do you want to guess where Indiana ranks for littering? Between number 47 and number 50 in the U.S. I'm not saying that slogans matter, but that idea of putting a story, one little phrase, don't mess with Texas, and immediately we relate to it. We understand because that's what it is. We understand this because social media now is short story. You scroll through these very quick little videos. Platforms have been created. Tech Talks are basically short stories. Almost all the TED Talks that have really went viral are somebody telling a life story or a story that's happening. The app TikTok itself was created for that idea of short stories. I love the name TikTok. Do you understand what that says? It's the ticking of a clock as time passes. But stories are far more easy to remember than just straight data. And Christ does this through parables, but he even goes further. He puts in images from the natural world or something that is in your everyday life to pull in to these stories. So it's not just a story out in the ether, he's connecting it with something. Pictures like a sower goes out to sow. A person puts yeast in flour, a merchant seeking pearls, treasure hidden in a field, a fisherman's net. All of these are real day-to-day objects. So anytime you pass by that or interact with that object, that lesson comes back to you. And he's doing this all throughout his ministry. Now, real quick, I taught on this before, but one of the ways for us to understand this is through Jewish interpretation, what they call pardes. I just want to bring this back into our recollection again before we dive into this parable. But there's 4 levels, pardes. The first one is peshat. This literally means when you read the text or read the parable, the simple meaning is the first thing you look at. What does it just say? The second one is the remez, and that means allusion or reference, or what is it tying back to? What is this lesson being taught from? We often think, well, Christ is just out there teaching away. No, he is pulling from information and from data that he's learned in the text. And then the drash is application or exposition. We often think of the midrash in Jewish writings, but drash just means how can we explain this in a different way, or how can we apply this? And then the sod, S-O-D, the sod, it's pronounced like wood, but sud, some say sod, is the hidden, secret, or mystic meaning. And those are often harder to understand because of just the levels that you have to dig down through to get there. But we're going to try that. So real quickly, if we want to stand, go ahead and stand. I think I have this in your notes as well. Let's say these 2 verses together. And this is out of Matthew chapter 13. And the parable of the mustard seed. Let's just read it together. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. Thank you. You may be seated. Now, let's take a really quick pass at understanding this simply. Just say it out. What do you see when you read this parable? What does it mean? Go ahead. Small seed. Excellent. What else is in here? It grows. Okay, we got becomes a large tree. Birds come and perch in its branches. Anything else? That's excellent. Right? We can understand this parable, right? We've heard this over and over again. This, what you guys said is excellent. One we missed had to be planted. A man took it and planted in his field. Right? We got a nice, simple meaning of this. And maybe you should ask this. What are some odd things that you begin to pick up in this? What are some things that don't quite make sense or could be questioned? It's like the kingdom of heaven. That's a big open-ended question. Why? What is he trying to get at here? Why birds? Why are they birds coming and perching versus nesting, versus the tree giving shade to strangers, versus a tree giving fruit? All right. Now, what hinders us as Western listeners about understanding this parable? Never seen a mustard tree. Right? We have knowledge based on other teachings and sermons and reading the text ourselves, but So let me just give you a little bit of backstory because it is a different culture. It hinders us. It's a different lifestyle. So I don't know this. I don't do this. So in Israel, there are two different types of mustard, and you can spend a long time trying to figure out which one Christ was meaning. And when that's the issue, it's because he did it on purpose. He does that all the time. He'll choose a word where you go, oh, it could be that, but it also could be that. So he uses a very generic word of mustard. So the first type of mustard is called the white mustard. This is the type of mustard that our condiment comes from, and it grows everywhere. This is the hike that I just did in Israel in the spring, and this yellow is mustard. And you can eat the leaves. I'm not a mustard fan, so I don't really like the taste of it, but you can go out and graze and enjoy it. That's what they say. I tried. I did not appreciate it. But that is white mustard, and it grows everywhere. It is invasive and expands like crazy, which is interesting. The second mustard, and just so you want to know, that's the Sea of Galilee over here. The second type of mustard is a tree. And I realized I didn't have a very good picture of it when I tried to put my deck together. But these can grow 20, 25 feet tall in a massive bush. These are invasive as well. So invasive that the USA still, to this day, has a do not bring into this country law with this. And on your form that you fill out, coming back into the States, it'll ask you, have you been in open country or fields? They do not want this to get into the USA. We would think of it as multiflora rose, something similar, that is just impossible to get rid of. I think what honeysuckle is big here as well, where you just can't get rid of it. Doesn't matter what you do. So this is the same way. You can cut it down, you can dig it up, you can burn it. It's going to come back. It's just that both of these mustards, and this is why I think Christ is playing with the word a little bit, is this way. What I found very interesting is that a lot of this grows in the valleys just below Jerusalem, the Valley of Gehenna, which was the city dump. And this tree grows typically in filth or poison or wasteland. Shepherds are known, if they see mustard growing by a spring without any other plants, don't let your sheep drink it yet. But this is invasive. It grows, and in doing so, it pulls the water, and then other plants begin to grow and purify it. This tree is unstoppable. Now, let's go back to Peshat, the simple. Now, what do we understand about this? If you can see some of the seed pods here, are right here, and they are very, very, very small. That's the size of my hand. You can see probably 100 or more sitting in my hand. So now let's go back and try to understand this. Unassuming, small, seemingly worthless seed, not much there. Explosive growth once planted, can't kill it. Grows best where there's pollution or filth. It's a desperate plant. Refuses to stop. Nothing's going to prevent it from growing. Now, thinking of the parable, after you see this, what in the parable doesn't make sense? Small seeds makes the biggest plant, and right before that, he planted in his field. What farmer would plant an invasive species in his field? I think the listeners, when they heard him say this, went, "You just planted Japanese honeysuckle in your garden? Are you crazy? You ever tried to get that out?" The kingdom of heaven is like, wait a minute here. Are you saying that the kingdom of heaven is upside down? Or it's not right? Are you saying that the kingdom of heaven is like looking at something going, you really shouldn't do that? People are going to look at you and think that you're crazy. You tell me the kingdom of heaven is like that? Are you saying that the world is going to look at this kingdom of heaven experience and look at it with disdain? This kingdom is counterintuitive. It's not what we think. It's different. So if we go to the second level, the remez or illusion, we can dive in and understand a little bit more what Christ is pulling from in the context of what he's doing. The remez is from Ezekiel 17, and Ezekiel is talking about the Babylonian Empire and that had become a massive cedar, the greatest tree possible, and that it would be cut down and buried. Now, he jumps between stories in chapter 34 as well, but it talks about this great cedar being buried and even put into Sheol. It means that the empire of Babylon will be destroyed, but he's going to take a clipping from it and plant it on the greatest hill. And then it grows into this beautiful, it says, a tender spring from its utmost shoots, and plants it. And on the mountain heights of Israel I plant it, and it will produce branches and bear fruit and become a splendid cedar. Birds of every kind will come and perch in it. So now, the kingdom of heaven, it's upside down. It doesn't make sense. It's counterintuitive. You plant it where you don't think you should. Filth, anywhere, destruction. It grows. You can't stop it. And now we're beginning to see that from it, birds are going to come. What are the birds? The birds are the nations in Babylon. All the world is flocking into it. And you begin to see him dwelling into this concept from Ezekiel and saying, okay, from this, the empire is going to be destroyed. See, they thought the Messiah was coming, was going to kick Rome out, go to war with Rome, and set up his earthly kingdom. And he's like, wait a minute here, this is different. That's not how we're doing it. The seed grows. From the seed then becomes the tree, and then the world comes and populates it. Because the kingdom of heaven is different. It's hard for us to understand the small. Are you saying that that little insignificant seed, planted 100 times deeper than its size, fighting to come up from the ground, are you saying that that brings the kingdom of heaven? That little thing, that glass of water given in his name, that brings the kingdom? The 2 mites from the widow, are you saying that that is the greatest thing in the kingdom? It's teaching a young child about Jesus in the privacy of your home. It's connecting with your friends and neighbor, whether they're next door or in Ghana. It's a 92-year-old lady working at a food pantry. Are we saying that's what brings the kingdom? Now, there's one remaining step, the last one in our interpretation, and it's sud, or sod. That is the hidden, the deep things, the mystical or mystic meanings. And there's something that we haven't talked about yet. At the beginning of this, we see that it's like a man took and planted. What happens to a seed when you plant it? It dies. Except for a corn of wheat fall into the ground and dies. It abideth alone, but if it dies, it bringeth forth much fruit. At the core of what this parable is death and resurrection. You want to bring the kingdom of heaven? Got to die. Because unless our life comes from Christ, it is meaningless. And now, here from death, divine creative power can begin. We also see that the kingdom of heaven is not measured by the harvest, but by the planting. It's not measured by how many things happened or how big the tree grew. It's because it died and was planted. To human eyes, much of this labor seems futile, fruitless, resulting in seemingly repeated failure, but Christ is full of joyful confidence. He knows that God has made a beginning, bringing with it a harvest of reward beyond all asking or thinking. In spite of every failure, every opposition, from hopeless beginnings, God brings forth a triumphant end, which he had promised. In this parable, we begin to see at the heart of what Christ is saying, the death and resurrection. It begins with the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And then it also begins with our death and rebirth in him. If we die, if we are planted, his kingdom comes. Born out of a faith, a desperate faith, planted in conditions that we don't even want to imagine. But from that explosive growth that you can't kill, you can't deny it, it's going to happen. You may not see it, but it will grow. Even though it may be that small, insignificant seed, out of it will come the greatest tree. And the world will come to perch in it. Let's stand. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your amazing teachings. 2 simple verses that out of it, in a nutshell, is the entire gospel, the entire kingdom of heaven. Help us to be planted and just give whatever we can, whenever we can, because we know that if a seed is put in the ground, it will grow, because you have promised it. In Messiah's name, amen.